Hurricane Irma now heading toward Tampa as it tears through Florida. Hurricane Irma is barreling up the Sunshine State, bringing heavy rainfall and powerful winds. The deadly hurricane, which is now a Category 2 storm with sustained winds of 105 miles per hour, has passed through Naples and continues to head north, with Fort Myers and Tampa in its path. Millions of Floridians are under orders to evacuate, and many are desperately seeking shelter from the storm. One Naples resident told ABC News she was turned away from 2 shelters before she and her 10-year-old son were finally accepted at one. "We have a dog and there were not that many shelters that accepted dogs," she said, adding, "We didn't want to be that far away from our home." While she and her son stay inside the shelter, her husband is hunkering down with their dog at home. Irma made its second landfall on Marco Island along the southwest Florida coast this afternoon with 115 miles per hour winds after battering the Florida Keys earlier today. The hurricane has left at least 3 people dead in Florida, including a sheriff's deputy, and at least 27 people dead in the Caribbean. Beyond the winds and rain that Irma is bringing, the storm surge is also expected to be devastating. In Naples, waters rose 4 feet in just 30 minutes. How Key West and Miami fared this morning. The Florida Keys were hit hard with wind gusts of 120 miles per hour in parts and 89 miles per hour winds in Key West. Officials in the Florida Keys said that residents who evacuated should not return until further notice. From there, the storm lashed Miami with winds whipping around high-rise buildings at speeds approaching 100 miles per hour. The National Weather Service said 2 cranes collapsed in the city and a 94 miles per hour wind gust was recorded at Miami International Airport. Along with the strong gusts of wind, water rushed through Miami's streets. One resident said streets were flooded up to the newspaper stands and the winds were so powerful that windows cracked from the sheer force of the gusts. Naples pelted with wind and rain. Visibility became poor in Naples this afternoon as the eye of the storm neared. Some now sheltered in Naples had fled from the eastern side of Florida after it was first forecast that Irma would hit the eastern coastline. The mayor of Naples said those in hotels around the city were ordered out of common areas and into their rooms. After the bulk of the storm passed over the city, Naples officials said that the city's water distribution lines have been broken, so residents are being told to buy all the water that is coming out of taps. Florida Gov. Rick Scott warned residents of dangerous storm surges that could reach 10 to 15 feet above sea level in the Naples area. "Do not think the storm is over when the wind slows down," Scott said Saturday. "The dangerous storm surge will rush in and could kill you." There have already been 3 deaths reported in Florida, including a man in Monroe County, which encompasses Key West. He was killed after he lost control of a truck that carried a generator as winds whipped at tropical storm strength, officials said. Why these Miami residents aren't leaving home as Irma approaches. Reporter's notebook, my experience with 2 Hurricane Irma victims. Irma diary, Tampa woman chronicles waiting out storm with her parents in Naples. Irma diary, a Miami resident who opted not to evacuate documents writing out the storm. 2 other people, a sheriff's deputy and a corrections officer, died from a 2-car crash in the rain in Hardee County, which is about 60 miles inland from Sarasota, officials said. 2 other people, a sheriff's deputy and a corrections officer, died from a 2-car crash in the rain in Hardee County, which is about 60 miles inland from Sarasota, officials said. The deputy, identified as Julie Bridges, was a 13-year veteran of the county force, said Hardee County Sheriff Arnold Lanier. She was heading home after a night shift, the Florida Highway Patrol said. The second victim was a sergeant at the Hardee Correctional Institute who had been on his way to work, the Highway Patrol said. Tampa's mayor issues stern warning. Tampa, which is now experiencing wind gusts of over 50 miles per hour, is in the predicted path of the storm. And the city's mayor Bob Buckhorn did not mince words when he warned residents on Twitter earlier today. "We are about to get punched in the face by this storm. We need to be prepared," he wrote. He later spoke to ABC News and said that Tampa, which is naturally low-lying and on the Gulf Coast, has taken precautions to prepare. "I think we're about as ready as any city could be, given what we're about to face," Buckhorn said to ABC News. He said that the city will deal with the aftermath, but right now, We're pretty much in God's hands. Millions ordered to evacuate. As the monster storm neared, about 6.5 million Floridians were under mandatory and voluntary evacuation orders. Evacuations were ordered in Georgia and South Carolina as well. Over 116,000 people are in 530 shelters across Florida to ride out the storm. 30,000 people are in shelters in Miami-Dade alone. But others decided to hunker down at home bracing for Irma's impact. Sylvia Constantinidis, a 27-year resident of Miami, told ABC News earlier this week that she would stay in the city during the storm. "I own my house. You leave and then there is a major disaster, then they don't let you come back to Florida until many days after," Constantinidis said. "If you have any damage or water getting into your house and you have to wait for 2 or 3 weeks to come back, then your house will be completely damaged by the time you come back to Florida." Lost power and reported tornadoes. By 5:30 p.m. ET, roughly 2.7 million customers were without power in Florida, according to Rob Gould, the vice president of communications at Florida Power and Light. Meanwhile, a tornado watch is in effect today for Fort Myers, Tampa, Melbourne, Daytona Beach, and Jacksonville. There have been at least 3 reported tornadoes in Central and South Florida. Irma's heavy rains and winds are expected to reach Georgia, too, and Georgia Gov. Nathan Deal today expanded his emergency declaration so all Georgia counties are under states of emergency. Why these Miami residents aren't leaving home as Irma approaches. As more than 1 million Floridians are under orders to evacuate, ABC News spoke to some Miami residents who are hunkering down at home as Hurricane Irma, the most powerful Atlantic storm in a decade, approaches. Irma, initially a Category 5 and since downgraded to Category 4, is expected to make landfall as a Category 5 hurricane on the Florida Keys Sunday morning. Florida Gov. Rick Scott said in an interview today with ABC News Good Morning America co-anchor Robin Roberts, "If you're in an evacuation zone, you've got to get out. You can't wait. This thing's coming." Scott added, "It looks like it's going to go right through the middle of our state." Miami and other heavily populated areas of southeastern Florida are on the worst side of the storm. But Sylvia Constantinidis, a 27-year resident of Miami, told ABC News she has decided to stay in the city during the storm. "I own my house. You leave and then there is a major disaster, then they don't let you come back to Florida until many days after," Constantinidis said. "If you have any damage or water getting into your house and you have to wait for 2 or 3 weeks to come back, then your house will be completely damaged by the time you come back to Florida." Her home in Coconut Grove is just a block away from the water, she said. "We didn't have any damage during Wilma or Katrina, although we were hit very strongly. But this time, we are taking extra measures like the sandbags against the door in case there is flooding," she added. Hundreds of Miami residents, many of whom decided to stay in the city during Irma, waited in line for hours Thursday to get bags of sand. The city of Miami distributed 6,000 bags of sand in the parking lot of Grapeland Water Park, allowing residents to take 6 bags each. City officials began shoveling sand at 3 p.m., but residents were lined up as early as noon. Since Constantinidis is in an evacuation neighborhood, she booked a hotel close to her home so she can check on the damage immediately after the storm hits. Constantinidis said the preparations for Irma bring back memories of Hurricane Andrew, which devastated Florida 25 years ago. "During that storm, I lived the experience of feeling that I was inside a blender," she said. But as she watches her city and state prepare for Irma this week, she said the storm seems to be the biggest I have ever experienced in 27 years in Florida. Miami resident Jan Michael Medina is also hunkering down. He told ABC News leaving the city was never an option. "I can't leave. My mom is terminally ill," Medina said. "It's too hard for her to be transported, so there's no choice for me. Our area is not in an evacuation area, but our house is kind of low. A lot of water comes in, so we do have to take extra precautions, and I do have a sick mom at home, so it's taking a lot of extra stuff to make sure the house is okay," Medina said. "We have 4 packs of water, we got some food, we are going to try to do more groceries, but right now, sand is our priority. And gas tanks to hold the gas," he added. Medina said he waited in line for 5 hours to get the sandbags he needs to help protect his home from flooding, and he was thrilled to finally check that off his list. His sister and brother-in-law also flew in from Michigan to help. I was watching the news until Tuesday, and then when I saw how strong it got, it was a no-brainer. Charlie Hernandez, Medina's brother-in-law, said. I had to come. As their family scrambles to finish preparing, they are worried about the structure of their home. We were here during Hurricane Andrew in 1992. I was 5 years old, Medina said. Same house and everything. It dropped a lot of the trees, but we survived. The roof of their home, which withstood Andrew, hasn't been replaced since then, Medina said. Hopefully, it will survive this one, he added. Medina said the family's plan is simple: hunker down, wait for the hurricane to hit and hope for the best. At the end of the day, there is only so much you can do: board up the windows, put sand to block the water, and hopefully that's it, Medina said. Hopefully you survive. When my crew and I woke up Thursday morning in San Juan, after Hurricane Irma had slammed Puerto Rico, the monster storm's fury was evident everywhere. Hundreds, maybe thousands, of downed trees were scattered all over the city, and a majority of the island's population, more than 1 million residents, were without power. But I was still waiting to hear how the U.S. Virgin Islands had fared since the U.S. territory had been slammed by Irma on Wednesday. It was quiet. That silence was worrisome. But on our way to my live shot for Good Morning America, I bumped into a pair of men who said they worked for the Department of Justice. They told us that Street, Thomas and Street, Croix had been hammered by Irma and that relief teams were being sent there to assist residents. Around 11 a.m., we arrived at a private airport in San Juan in an attempt to get on one of the Coast Guard's initial flyovers of the U.S. Virgin Islands. At the airport, I began speaking with an officer who pointed to 2 young women he had just rescued from St. Thomas. One of them, Canadian college student Alex Tamor, 22, badly bloodied and confused, was being put on a stretcher. Alex's friend, Idaho native and college student Maddie Gortat, 22, was close to tears and looked traumatized. Maddie told me that Alex had fallen and hit her head around 6 p.m. the night before, but getting to the nearby hospital proved impossible, let alone driving conditions. They were told that the hospital had been destroyed. I exchanged numbers with Maddie as she and Alex got into the ambulance, as I planned to follow up with them. Maddie called me an hour later, and it sounded like she was crying. They were at the hospital but had not yet seen a doctor, and they were having trouble communicating with the Spanish-speaking hospital staff. She wanted to know if my crew and I could help. I said we're on our way. We arrived at the hospital, San Juan Centro Medico, to discover a chaotic scene. The hospital was surrounded by countless downed trees and branches. The staff was so overwhelmed by power outages and injured patients, they had blocked off all the entrances to the emergency room and were refusing to allow in visitors. We watched dozens of people try to convince the security guard to allow them in to see their injured loved ones. The guard refused. We were also denied entry, but after a while, we managed to convince the guard that Alex and Maddie needed our help. Once inside, Maddie told us they had left Street Thomas with just one pair of flip-flops between them and a phone that was now low on power. Nothing else. We lent her a spare phone and charger, and the girls called their families. My Spanish-speaking producer Joshua Hoyos began acting as their translator. A doctor finally came, saying he would do CT scans of Alex's head. While we were waiting, the girls told us their terrifying story of riding out the storm in a private house. During the worst of the hurricane Wednesday afternoon, when the U.S. Virgin Islands experienced a peak wind gust of 131 miles per hour, they said they got into a shower and covered themselves with a mattress. It was scary, Maddie told me. She said the wind felt like the house was breathing. All sorts of objects were flying around and hitting the walls, and even though the windows had been boarded up, some of those coverings flew off. I asked Maddie if they thought they may die. We cried here and there, she told me. We just didn't know if the roof was going to come off at any moment, chimed in Alex. We were praying. When the worst of Irma was over, Maddie and Alex went outdoors to find complete destruction. All the homes in the surrounding area were destroyed, roofs had been ripped off, cars flipped over, downed power lines and trees were strewn everywhere, and animals were roaming the streets. They showed my crew and I photos and videos they'd taken of the destruction. But they say around 6 p.m., Alex fell, smacking her head and face on the ground. She was in and out of consciousness. They got lucky because an ambulance happened to be on their side of the island, but the EMT couldn't take them to the hospital because it had been destroyed. Instead, they said he set them up at a restaurant on an air mattress and stayed with them overnight, until the U.S. Coast Guard arrived. Just as we were about to leave Maddie and Alex, Centro Medico's backup power supply failed, plunging the ER into darkness. Photo below, triggering alarms on life-saving machines. Their terrifying ride was not over yet. We left them with that phone and charger, and told them to stay in touch with us. Last we heard, Alex finally got her scans and the Canadian consulate had dispatched its honorary consul to be by her side. Tampa Bay resident Jessica Brightman decided to join her parents in Naples, Florida, to ride out Hurricane Irma, expecting the storm to largely wreak havoc on the state's east coast. But on Saturday, a hitch in her plan emerged. Naples was projected to be in Irma's path. Still, the family had prepared for Irma. The windows are boarded up, and the cupboards are stocked with food, bottled water and other supplies. Brightman, who works at the University of South Florida in Tampa, is documenting her stay for ABC News. Brightman's diary will be continually updated. Sunday 2:30 p.m. While at the shelter, Brightman is making friends with the other families. A couple sitting next to us has a 19-month-old daughter who is adorable and has been providing a distraction to pass the time. Some people have been walking laps around the shelter, not sure if it's out of boredom or nerves or both. Sunday 12 p.m. A sneak peek inside this shelter. Power for the lights is run by generator at this point, and the winds are picking up. People have been very friendly and helpful to their new neighbors. It's just so sad the unpredictability of what's about to happen to my hometown of Naples and Tampa Bay, a place I've called home for more than a decade. Sunday 9 a.m. In all my years of living in Florida, this is the first time we've ever left the house for a hurricane and gone to a shelter. So we're trying to make the best of it by pretending it's indoor camping, or I'm really just on one of my 24-hour international flights and I need to kill some time. Some people are gathering outside to get some fresh air before the storm really rolls in. Saturday 9 p.m. Because of the threat of the storm surge, my mom was getting too nervous, so she had us go to a shelter. It's definitely an odd feeling knowing that only your most important valuables, possessions, aside from family, are with you in a backpack because of the unknown of what's to come. Here's to a long 24 to 36 hours ahead. I wonder how many books I'll get through. Millions of Floridians, especially in the southern part of the state, were given evacuation orders in advance of Hurricane Irma's arrival, but Miami financial advisor Zach Mann decided to stay put. Mann, 37, has lived in Miami his whole life and he's seen hurricanes before. Even though his apartment in Miami Beach's Brickell neighborhood was in the mandatory evacuation zone, but he chose to stay put. He told ABC News that he balked at evacuating because he was concerned that Irma would move north through Florida along the same route that evacuees were taking to flee. He also wasn't too enthused about the return to South Florida following an evacuation because of the gridlock that would undoubtedly clog freeways across the state. His friend Lonnie Page is staying with him at his apartment because the buildings there are newly constructed, so he presumes they would fare well during a monster storm like Irma, he said. The management of his building relayed the message of the mandatory evacuation but did not go door to door kicking people out, Mann said. Some of the utilities like hot water and air conditioning and the elevator services were turned off protectively. Armed with supplies for a couple weeks, including coolers filled with ice and a small generator, Mann and Page are ready to take on Irma.